Life can be pretty stressful sometimes, and some days you just want to play Pokemon cards, have some fun, relieve some stress, maybe turn off your brain, and yeah, if you want to turn off your brain and have some fun playing some Pokemon cards, Iron Thorns EX, this is the deck for you. I most recently went to a Pokemon card tournament after going to a concert the night before, basically clubbing because it was like all house music at a club. I knew that I was going to go to a cup the next morning and I didn't want to have to stress about my deck selection or the tech cards or the matchups or anything like that. I just wanted to play a consistent deck that could basically be played on autopilot, and that's what I built. I built my own personal Iron Thorns EX deck, and the deck we're going to be looking at today, I am very proud of it because I did, as I just mentioned, I went to a League Cup with it, and at that League Cup tournament there was 22 players. We had to play 5 rounds of Swiss going into top 8 cut, and I basically could say I went undefeated for that tournament except for round 2, where I basically did overthinking. I was prepping too far in advance and I didn't turn my brain off enough, and so I got a gameplay loss for a major gameplay error. But I did manage to get my revenge on that player in top 4. I highly recommend this deck if you are just a chill guy or gal or just someone who wants to have some fun playing Pokemon and not have to worry about overthinking things, because let's face it, there's a lot of times where you self-sabotage and overthink a line and you just overcook and you lose. This is a deck where the lines are very obvious for the most part, and so there's very little room for error. One last thing, I did just come back home from a Pokemon card tournament at my sponsored store, Comfy Hobbies. If you guys haven't heard on like social media or anything, we have renewed our contract. We've re-signed with Comfy Hobbies. So if you guys want to buy any Pokemon cards at all, check out comfyhobbies.com and use code SneakerTalk to save 5% off, but only if you're chill. If you're not chill, I don't want you to use my code or save money. I went 4 wins and 1 loss. My loss was in round 1 to one of the better players that attends Comfy Hobbies, round 1, and he ended up leaving like after round 3, so he couldn't boost my resistance up any higher, but very happy. I've pretty much only lost 1 real game with this deck across like what, 14 or 15 games. Also, I'm going to be selling this playmat on my eBay store, linked down below. Right now Canada Post is on strike, so my only shipping options are UPS, so it's a little expensive for shipping, but I can fit a ton of stuff in your box if you want to buy anything from me. Shout out to the buyer of this Terrapagos EX, I appreciate you. Also, I gotta say, look how banged up these sleeves are. I've only played this deck for 2 tournaments, and I'm gonna have to start switching out some of these sleeves. These are from the Trainer's Toolkit that just released. I did a video on this on my channel, so if you want to see what everything included, check it out. I'm gonna be breaking down literally every single card in this deck, why I chose to put them in the deck. Hopefully you guys can be understanding and patient and open-minded for all the cards I have for this deck. And if you have any comments, criticism, or your own experiences with Iron Thorns, absolutely comment down below. I'd love to hear from you guys. I've been a big fan of Iron Thorns since its release. I actually did a deck profile of Iron Thorns well before it won the Pokemon World Championships this most recent season, so I'm not like a bandwagoner by any means. 4 copies of Iron Thorns EX. It's a quad Pokemon deck. There's not too many decks that exist like this. The last time I played a quad only Pokemon deck was with Metagross or Metagross VMAX. Metagross is another one of my favorite Pokemon, but Tyranitar also is, so the fact that I can play a Tyranitar card, a Tyranitar Pokemon essentially, makes my soul very, very happy. 4 copies of Iron Thorns, no other Pokemon for this deck because the main game plan revolves around Iron Thorns ability initialization. So let's talk about the pros of this Pokemon. 230 HP, which is a thick unit. That's a lot. A lot of decks aren't able to one-shot 230 damage, and so you'll be able to tank 1 to 2 to 3 hits depending on your opponent's Pokemon. Another thing to note is that it is a future archetype Pokemon, which, you guessed it, means we're going to be able to take advantage of one of the best tools in the game, Future Booster Energy Capsule, which we'll talk about later. Next up, we got the ability Initialization. This is disgusting. If you're familiar with the Stadium card from our previous, format or rotation, Path to the Peak, it is that Stadium, but as an ability. Initialization, let's just read it together. As long as this Pokemon is in the active spot, Pokemon with a rule box in play, both yours and your opponent have no abilities except for future Pokemon. That's why we're only running 4 copies of Iron Thorns EX and no other Pokemon, because for example, when I would tech Iron Thorns EX into my other decks like Miraidon, your opponent can do certain plays like Iron Bundle to gust the Iron Thorns out of the active, or they'll use Boss's Orders or Counter Catcher. By only having Iron Thorns EX in your deck, one of your ways that your opponent would usually counterplay you is to gust out of the active. But yeah, what are you going to do? You're going to gust into another Thorns? And another Thorns, and another Thorns. So the only way your opponent is able to turn off initialization is if they play a Klefki, a Fluttermane, or they use the item card Canceling Cologne. So those are the 3 counters to Iron Thorns EX you do want to keep in mind. Next up, we have the attack Volt Cyclone. For 1 lightning and double colorless energy, you do 140 damage, and it says you move an energy from this Pokemon to one of your benched Pokemon. Now, you may move, it is move an energy. So you have to move it no matter what, which sometimes can be really crappy. So that is another thing to keep in mind. This is a control style deck, and one of the biggest grievances a lot of people have when they want to talk smack about Iron Thorns is its bad attack. It's 3 energy costs and it does 140 damage. That is not much, but I think one thing a lot of players, a lot of rookie Pokemon players, even some experienced ones, I have some experienced ones that like to talk a lot of ish about my Pokemon decks that I build, is they make fun of the control decks about how they have weak attacks, but they don't fully understand the concept of a control deck where it's also abilities. Abilities are huge in the Pokemon TCG, and so you're going to have really strong matchups with Iron Thorns if you match into Pokemon decks that are very reliant on ability-based Pokemon with EXs and Vs and Radiants, like Radiant Greninja, Radiant Charizard. This Pokemon also turns off those abilities. So again, this is a control style of deck, so it's not always about dishing out big damage. However, 140 is a really good number to hit or to have as an attack damage, because you're able to 2-shot a lot of Pokemon in the game. Now, it only needs 2 energies to attack as well, 1 lightning and a double colorless. So for 2 attachments, you're going to be able to do 120 damage, and if you have the Future Booster Energy Capsule on your Iron Thorns, you're going to get to do an extra 20 damage. So you go 140, then down to 120 because of the DTE, and then buffed up again by 20 to get back to the original 140. Not only that, you're doing more damage, but you're also getting free retreat on your Iron Thorns EX. So after your Iron Thorns EX soaks in a hit from your enemy, you're able to retreat it back into your other Iron Thorns that you have on the bench, and well behold, you've already moved an energy onto that Thorns, so all you need is 1 more attachment to that Thorns to start dishing out some more damage. Now, there's some diabolical plays we're going to get into revolving around the attack, which we're going to talk about in a second, but do keep in mind you do have a 4 retreat cost, so you're not going to be able to retreat unless you have 2 double turbo energies and discard those, or the Future Booster Energy Capsule. However, we do have a supporter in this deck which pairs amazingly with Iron Thorns. I know what you're thinking. Is this deck going to mulligan? And honestly, you are going to mulligan sometimes. It really just depends on the luck of the draw. There's a lot of games where I don't mulligan at all. And then there's also games where I mulligan once or twice, sometimes 3 times, and then sometimes you have to get a judge mulligan. So when you mulligan, you reveal your hand to your opponent. So don't reveal your hand until after your opponent has put down a Pokemon, because that way they might play differently knowing you're playing Iron Thorns. So make sure your Pokemon has your opponent has a Pokemon in the active before you reveal your mulligan of all your Iron Thorns cards. And then you're going to get to hear them moan and groan about, oh, you're playing Iron Thorns. And then you get to laugh at them and be like, heh, yes, I am. Now, if you don't know what a judge mulligan is, the cap for mulligans is 7. So after the 7th mulligan, if you don't have an active Pokemon available, a judge will come over and they're going to keep revealing every single card on top of your deck until there is a basic Pokemon, which is gonna, surprisingly be an Iron Thorns EX. So you're gonna get to have your opponents have a lot of knowledge about the decks, the cards in your deck, for example, but usually it's not too big of a deal. There's not too many one-off cards in this deck, so there is some, but we try and keep those a secret. But on average, I'd say I mulligan probably 2 or 3 times on average with Iron Thorns EX. Energy cards. So we really want to be able to attack with 2 attachments, so we have 4 double turbo energies. Amazing card. It's going to be a sad day when DTE does rotate later next spring. Next up, we have 7 lightning energies. Lightning is not too hard to fine with Earthern Vessel, and we do play a lot of Arvens as well. So we have lots of 11 energies in total, and we have many ways to find our energy cards if we're not able to have in our hand. Disclaimer, I have been going first with my Iron Thorns deck pretty much every single time I can, because I feel like a lot of decks right now enjoy going first, and so if we're able to deny your opponent going first, then that's always strong. However, I do whiff the first turn energy attachment, I want to say, about 60 or 70% of the time. And it does feel pretty bad whiffing your turn 1 attachment, but it's not the end of the world, because you are, again, slowing down your opponent with the ability of Iron Thorns. If you do go second, it's not bad either, because you're pretty much going to be guaranteed to get an attachment off with the help of your draw resources like Professor's Research, or of course you can always Arven for Earthen Vessel or a Energy Loto. And we play some great tools in this deck that really allow your turn 2s to be very strong as well. I'll be honest with you, I keep going first with this deck just to deny my opponents from going first. I'm going to start going second though as we get closer and closer to the Toronto Regionals, because this is a deck that I am considering to play. It is in my top 4 decks for consideration. We have 11 energies in total, with 3 cards that help you find energies in this deck, and technically more than 3. Next up, let's talk about the stadiums. We have 2 stadiums in this deck, and a lot of people will often play only 2 Lost City. However, I've found some amazing usage out of the other stadium in this deck, and that is Town Store. This deck plays 6 tools in total, so being able to access those tools with Town Store is very, very strong. There's going to be turns where you really aren't going to be knocking anything out, so Lost City is kind of useless, and there's going to be turns where you really need a Future Booster Energy Capsule, or a Devolution, or a Turbo Energize. Town Store helps get you there. So being able to search out a tool is very strong, and if your opponent tries to do a boss stall style of play, but they're not able to remove your Town Store stadium that's on the board, that just means you're going to be able to grab a Future Booster Energy Capsule for free, and means their boss stall or whatever play means nothing. Lost City is also a must-have inclusion for this deck, because if we're able to completely remove particular Pokemon from play and not have to worry about them being super rotted or night stretchered back into the deck or into the game, then that is just a way to even slow down your opponent even more. So if your opponent, for example, has a Mimikyu, one of the biggest kryptonites, one of the biggest weaknesses to this deck is Mimikyu, because we don't have any Pokemon that can attack Mimikyu unless we play a Canceling Cologne. If we know we're going to attack a Pokemon that turn and knock it out, particularly a high value Pokemon, maybe it's something like a Charmander, maybe it's something like a Mimikyu, for example. If you're able to play a Lost City before knocking them out, you're going to have extra control over the game. So yeah, we only played 2 stadiums right here, but we also play a supporter that lets you search out a stadium. So based off of the current board state in the game, you're going to be able to have some flexibility in the lands that you take. So that's one of the things about this deck, because it is so linear. A lot of the skill involved with this deck involves the deck building. So I've chosen to have more options available rather than just have double Lost City, which has become a really normalized thing. Next up, we're going to talk about tools. So we have 3 copies of Future Booster Energy Capsule. This is a card that some players opt to have 4 in. I totally understand why you might want to have 4. However, I think 3 is the sweet spot, because we want to be able to have our Iron Thorns not always have Future Booster Energy Capsule on it. Sometimes you want to use other tools, which we're going to get into in a second. Future Booster Energy Capsule will allow your future Pokemon, only Iron Thorns of course in this example, to do 20 extra damage. So you're going to basically get rid of that damage reduction from double turbo energy. And it also means if you have only lightning energies attached to your Iron Thorns, that you're going to be able to do 160 damage, which means you can 2-shot Pokemon like Dragapult EX, or those Pokemon that have 320 HP, because you're going to do 160 damage twice over the course of 2 turns. Next up, we have Technical Machine Turbo Energize. Not too many decks play this card, however, this deck takes some really great advantage of it, because we're only using 1 attack. So by having a attack like this that you can search out for with Arven or Town Store, allows you to just have pressure in the game when you only have 1 attachment. So if you're going second, you're typically going to want to grab a Turbo Energize. It's usually going to be like an Arven for a Techno Radar and Techno Turbo Energize. That way you can start setting up your board even stronger. This card is so important in my list that I have 2 copies of Turbo Energize. You want to be able to have a strong turn 1 going second, and there's just turns where you're not knocking things out. For whatever reason, it's always good to be able to accelerate more energies onto the board than those out of your deck. And of course, that means your draws in the future turn are going to be stronger as well. Another thing is, if you don't end up needing the second one later down the road, you'll be able to use Techno Radar to discard it, and basically you're going to Arven for 2 the Iron Thorns with the help of just, doing this. You can also use it for fodder for your Lost Vacuums, and you can also just burn it from your hand as well if you don't need it, particularly against decks like Banette where they item lock you. So you can just drop this tool in and have one less trainer to worry about them doing some additional damage, which does come up in the gameplay videos. We actually recorded the top 4 and the finals of me winning the League Cup with this deck, so you guys are gonna get some gameplay as well. I'm very excited to start showing you guys IRL gameplay. So 2 copies of Turbo Energize, a very strong card. Next up, we have Technical Machine Devolution. This card is amazing, and if you're able to save it for late game after your opponent has used up a couple of rare candies, it is very, very good. In my matchup against a Charizard EX player in the very last round of the cup that I won, I was able to keep this a secret the entire game 1. I didn't play it at all. It was never revealed under any circumstances, and so going into game 2, I basically had a secret tech up my sleeve, Technical Machine, that I was able to utilize in game number 2. So Technical Machine Devolution means it just devolves your opponent's Pokemon. You only need 1 colorless energy on it as well, meaning that you can still have a strong attack from an Iron Thorns that's missing the additional energies to do the other main attack, or the main attack, its only attack. And let's say if your opponent has burned through their rare candies, or they prized a couple, or they've had to discard it for whatever reason, the Devolution's power level scales even higher. So Devolution is very good, especially if your opponent does go first as well. This means they're gonna likely be able to rare candy evolve on their second turn or third or fourth turn, for example. You could consider having a second one, honestly, but I found 1 to be like the sweet spot. Also, there are times where you're not able to play Arven on a particular turn, and so if you do have Town Store, you can really do a cool Town Store for Devo play, which does come up at times, especially if, say, your opponent hits you with an Iono or a Judge, or you play a Judge. Just being able to search out Devolution at any point of the game with the help of Town Store feels busted. Next up, let's get to the item cards in this deck. And I haven't shown the exact count, but there is, I believe, 11 energies, 4 Pokemon, and 35 trainer cards. So a lot of the more than half of the deck is trainer cards. All right, so Techno Radar, this is our consistency card. We're typically gonna try and use Arven to grab this in the earlier turns, so we can set up more Iron Thorns EX. Techno Radar is very strong. You just have to discard 1 single card, and it allows you to grab 2 copies of Iron Thorns and add them to your hand. So they don't have to go onto the bench right away, but it is nice being able to thin out 2 Pokemon instantly, and you can also burn, for example, a card that's useless in your hand, so you just have less dead cards in your deck. Now, I have seen some lists play Nest Ball and Techno Radar. However, I found Techno Radar at 2 to be my preferred ratio. Next up, we have one of the few RNG cards in the deck. We got Pokegear 3.0. This card allows you to look through the top 7 cards of your deck and grab a supporter in it. So, it's really important to thin out your cards that way, or like the dead cards out of your deck, so you're not seeing them off of Pokegear. You want to basically be able to use Pokegear like how you would a Lumineon, where you have thinned out your deck so much that you're going to be able to grab the exact supporter you want when you play it. Of course, it is an item card, so you can use your opponent's Pokestop for it, which is really, really handy. And we run multiple copies of a lot of the supporter cards in our deck, which means the Pokegears are quite strong and quite useful at helping us find particular cards. Pokegear has come really clutch. It's one of those RNG cards, so if you are going to stress when you play this deck, this card can be stressful at times, but all the supporter cards in this deck are very good and very strong, so being able to search for them without having to drop in a 2 prize like liability like most players do when they have to play Lumineon V is very good. Also, being able to turn off your opponent's Lumineon V, turn off their Squawkabilly, turn off the Rotom V, all very strong. One thing to do note is Iron Thorns does not turn off Forest Seal Stone, so if players do get desperate, they will bench a Rotom or they will bench a Lumineon just to put a Forest Seal Stone on it, just so they can use the Seal Stone for 1 card, the Star Alchemy ability. And it's always nice to see when your opponent has that desperate situation where they have to bench a Lumineon, because then you can just boss it up and slap it for 2 prizes with Iron Thorns. Next up, we have some more gambly, risky, stress-inducing cards. Energy Loto. Just like Pokegear says, look at the top 7 cards, Energy Loto says look at the top 7 cards, but this time you're looking for an energy. So there's some times where you really need a lightning energy, or you really need a double turbo energy. Energy Loto will help get you there. This is a card that can help you search out for double turbo energy. There's another card we have in this deck which we're going to talk about later, but being able to Arven for Energy Loto or for Earthen Vessel is very clutch. Having access to both means you have more options available. Most of the time when you need that DTE, you're always going to want to have to Arven for Energy Loto. But if you just already have attached the DTE, Earthen Vessel comes clutch. You can discard a useless card in your hand and grab 2 lightning energies. So yeah, I have room for both in the deck. Some people will be against playing the Energy Loto, but it has come clutch so many times. Next up, we have 2 copies of Canceling Cologne. As I mentioned earlier, Mimikyu is a major threat for this deck because we have no way to attack into it. Some players, if you are very scared, if you're very scared of Mimikyu, if you're going to be worried about those control archetypes bumping into those, or sometimes even Gardevoir, for example, when they play a Mimikyu, having that Canceling Cologne is very useful. Of course, you can Arven search for this card. Some decks will play Silene, so you could coin flip to put a Canceling Cologne on the top of your deck. And if you think Mimikyu is going to be in very high population, maybe you go to a local scene where you have to be, you know, on your guard, then you're going to want to try and squeeze in a 3rd Canceling Cologne, maybe even another Lost City. Next up, we have 2 copies of Lost Vacuum. As you guys know, there's a lot of very strong tools out there in the Pokemon TCG. One of the sketchier matchups you could say for this deck is Dragapult EX, so being able to Arven search or just draw into this card raw, Lost Vacuum feels really good to Lost Zone their Sparkling Crystal, but it comes up as a very useful card against Pokemon decks like Raging Bolt. There's a lot of Raging Bolt players playing Charm and Ancient Booster Energy Capsule, so being able to just 2-shot the Raging Bolts with the help of Lost Vacuum is very good. Typically you would have to 3-shot it because the attack is on the weaker side, right? We have Pokemon Catcher, 3 copies of Pokemon Catcher. Pokemon Catcher didn't come up too often as a card where like it's a make or break situation. There's a lot of times where you're attacking exactly what you want to attack, and if not, you can just play one of the 3 copies of Boss that we have. But Pokemon Catcher feels very good in the deck as well. Running multiple copies also means that you don't feel as punished if you do hit tails on 1 or 2 of them. Being able to play supporter cards like Professor's Research or Judge and then playing Pokemon Catcher feels very strong if it does hit a heads. If it hit a tails, well, you hit a tails and that's how it goes sometimes, right? However, you are also able to Arven search for this, so it's a gustable search with Arven. Sometimes you don't want to play a research to keep digging through your deck, so being able to Arven for Pokemon Catcher is good. And if you don't want to leave it up to luck, we have Prime Catcher as well as our ace spec for this deck. Arven for Prime Catcher is very good. You also have, again, all your Pokemon are pretty much going to have free retreat with the help of the Future Booster Energy Capsule. So if you know you're going to attack a particular Pokemon, you're going to want to retreat for free into your Pokemon that you're not going to attack with, and then play the Prime Catcher so you can attack the Pokemon you want to, basically treat it like a boss. You can also swap out your active, which is very good. If you don't have the Future Booster Energy Capsule on your Pokemon, Prime Catcher can come in clutch. The other 2 cards that people will play include the Hero's Cape. Hero's Cape is a pretty popular one. Being able to make your Iron Thorns 330 HP is very scary. And the other one is pretty obvious. We got Legacy Energy, which is most commonly used in Lugia V-Star decks. Legacy Energy is very good. It means your opponent will have to knock out all 4 Iron Thorns, meaning they have to go 2, 2, 1, and then 2. And knocking out 4 Iron Thorns is a lot of work. However, I don't want my games to really go that long or get to that scenario. Prime Catcher just feels like the perfect pick for Iron Thorns EX. On that note, if you are thinking about playing competitively, Prime Catcher has been always a very expensive card. It was like $40, $50 for the longest time. Now it's like 30 or 35 bucks or something like that. However, Pokemon has just released the brand new Charizard EX League Battle Deck, which is the best value Pokemon product you can buy right now. So I highly recommend you buy the Charizard EX deck because the cost of the deck is pretty much the cost of a Prime Catcher, but you're also going to be able to get a playset of Pidgeot EX, Charizard, and there's a lot of great cards in the Charizard deck, so pick it up from your local game shop or of course from the partners in the channel linked down below using my promo codes. Next up, let's talk about the other RNG cards in our deck. we have 3 hammers. So 2 Crushing Hammers. A lot of Iron Thorns decks will play 3 or even 4. However, I really didn't want to rely too much on the Crushing Hammers to be my win condition. I wanted more consistency with my other cards in the deck. So Crushing Hammers can come in clutch. If you hit a heads here and there, it's pretty useful. However, one hammer that you don't have to coin flip for is the Enhanced Hammer. Enhanced Hammer is an instant discard. It's basically a heads for a special energy. So you're going to use this on your opponent's energies like Legacy Energy, Gift Energy, Mist Energies, or not Mist, what is it, Double Turbo Energy. There's quite a few decks too that actually play Luminous Energy, so having a guaranteed Arven searchable energy discard is also quite diabolical. And then the last item card for this deck before we get to the supporters is Grabber. This is a tech inclusion I have for the deck, and some people are going to hate it, some people are going to love it. I really enjoy Grabber. It's one of my favorite cards in the Pokemon TCG that doesn't see too much play. It says your opponent reveals their hand and you put a Pokemon you find there on the bottom of their deck. So it's not a you may, it's you have to put it to the bottom of their deck. But being able to play Grabber, especially early in the game, like maybe turn 1 going first, you're going to get instant hand knowledge of what your opponent is working with. And if they didn't bench a Pokemon in the opening of the game, which most players just don't because there's no reason to, they're going to be down to maybe even 1 Pokemon in their active, and that's it. So early Grabbers are very strong. Grabber is also very good with combination of Judge. So if you're able to play a Judge and you just happen to get a Grabber off of the Judge and you hit a Pokemon off the Grabber, you're able to bring them down to a 3-card hand, which is also very strong. But on top of that, say you have multiple supporter options in your hand. So you have like a Professor's Research and a Judge or an Arven. You're not sure what exactly game plan, like what the game plan is that you want to make for that turn is. Well, by playing Grabber, you'll know exactly what's in your opponent's hand, and you can decide if it's a hand that is worth playing Judge or worth playing something like an Iona, or if you can safely research away your hand knowing that your opponent is going to have a strong return turn. So Grabber good, but I understand if you don't want to have a Grabber in your deck. This is a tech inclusion, a personal choice, and I've had a lot of great value from Grabber. Now another card that is not included in my deck that does get to give you hand knowledge, which is quite strong, is Eerie. Eerie is a supporter card that I don't have in the deck for this build, but you get to look at your opponent's hand and discard up to 2 items in their hand. That is busted if especially your opponent is holding on to a Canceling Cologne and they're waiting to, for example, Regidrago V-Star. You instantly win against Regidrago V-Star if they prize their Canceling Cologne, or if you're able to hit them with an Eerie and their Canceling Cologne gets deleted, because that means they can't access their V-Star power for Regidrago, and that means they're not teal dancing at all during their game either. So Eerie is a supporter card that you might want to include. But yeah, Grabber is my item tech of choice. Grabber is one of those flexible cards, which, you know, don't play it if you don't want it. But honestly, if you're going to yoink my list and use it for like online games or test it out at locals, I highly recommend, and this goes for anybody's list that you're trying to net deck online, I highly recommend playing their 60 card list, especially if they're the player that built their list like myself, because every card is included for a very specific reason. And if you don't play the deck, then you might not have an understanding of why cards are in the deck the way that they are. So again, when you're net decking, try and play the exact 60 for at least 5 to 10 games, and then go from there, and then, you know, customize it to your liking. That's one area I feel like a lot of rookie and newbie players tend to like make as a mistake when they're net decking decks online, is they'll take like an amazing cracked out 60 card list, and it got a really high placement at a tournament for a reason, but then you swap out like 3 to 5 cards. That deck never would have necessarily gotten that high top placement if you made those swaps. But yeah, anyways, enough of my TED Talk. There's the Grabber. Next up, let's get to the supporters. So the main supporter card in our deck is Arven. Arven is one of the best cards you can play in the Pokemon trading card game. Grabbing 1 item and grabbing 1 tool is very strong. Again, we have 6 tools in our deck, so we're always able to grab something useful with Arven. And the item card that you can grab is going to be the missing piece to your Exodia that you need to make a very strong turn happen. If you're missing a, if you're down to a solo Thorns, you can grab a Techno Radar. If you're missing a Lightning Energy, you grab an Earthen Vessel. If you're missing a double Turbo Energy, you grab Energy Loto. If you want to Lost Vacuum away your opponent's tool, well, you grab Lost Vacuum. Arven lets you play the game and be as controlling as you can be. Now, if you could play a 5th Arven, you honestly might want to, but the next supporter I'm going to talk about is a one-off copy, and it's basically like a 5th copy of Arven. So I highly recommend this card. This is a card that I like to play a lot in other decks, and I think it's an underrated supporter. We're of course talking about Chorus's Tenacity. Yes, Chorus here lets you grab 2 cards. It's going to be 1 Stadium card and 1 Energy card. And so, say for example, you really need to grab an Energy card. Well, if you gotta play Pokegear, hopefully you hit a Chorus. Or if you really need a Stadium card on that turn, like a Lost City or the Town Store, which we showed you guys earlier, you can grab those with Chorus's Tenacity. And there's been many times where it's come up where I had to Chorus for a Town Store, and Town Store will get me the tool that I need on that particular turn, whether it's the Future Booster Capsule so I could retreat a Pokemon out of the active, or a Devolution, or Turbo Energize. Now, the play that got me a gameplay error that made me lose my only game at that League Cup was I played Chorus's Tenacity, and I didn't even need an energy on that turn. All I needed was a tool card. I just needed to grab my Turbo Energize. And so I did a shortcut in that game where I grabbed the Turbo Energize instead of grabbing the Town Store, which would then grab me the Turbo Energize. And so, yeah, don't make that misplay. And I was saying you guys could turn off your brains when you play, but I was like overthinking. I was playing like 1 step ahead of myself. So you do have to be careful. Take your time when you play this deck. Breathe, count to 5, do whatever you got to do to be in a very less stressed, like a stressless state of mind. Each action is very, very impactful with this deck because you're not doing so many different combo plays. So every supporter you play, every attachment you make, when you're moving energies with your Iron Thorns, everything has to be as clinical, as surgical, as precise as possible. You can't make those mistakes, and they're easy to catch with this deck. You're gonna think about all the different lines you can make because they're all very obvious about what you want to do. So 1 copy of Chorus's Tenacity, which again is like a 5th Arven. Next up, the other main supporter in this deck that we play is Judge. We got 3 copies of Judge. Now, if you've been playing Pokemon for a while, you would know that Judge plus Path to the Peak is an insanely strong combo. Turning off your opponent's abilities with Path or Iron Thorns, and then hitting them by disrupting their hand and giving them 4 completely random cards is very, very good. It's going to mess up their combo pieces they potentially had in hand, and sometimes you're just going to give them 1 to 2 dead cards, and out of a 4-card hand, that's really, really crippling. 3 copies of Judge. You could potentially run 4 copies. You could potentially run 2 copies plus 1 Iono. That's also something I want to experiment with going forward into Toronto Regionals, but 3 copies of Judge seems to be the sweet spot at the moment. I definitely am considering a Iono over a 3rd Judge though. Next up, we have Professor's Research at 4 copies. This is another card too, which, I might just do 3 Judge, 3 Research, and 1 Iono for Toronto Regionals. But yeah, 4 copies of Research. All the cards in this deck are very good. If you're able to play Research on an empty or low card hand, it just feels amazing to see so many new cards. It does feel painful at times if you have to, research away something like a boss's orders, but at the same time, you could potentially just draw into a Pokemon Catcher or draw into your Prime Catcher. Oh yeah, and one play I just want to mention real quick is I remember that Pokegear 3.0 is so good, you don't always need to play it right away. Like sometimes it's just really worth keeping Pokegear in your hand, because if your opponent knows you have a Judge or a certain supporter in your hand, then they might want to hit you with their own Judge or hit you with their own Iono. So you want to time your Pokegears correctly and also maximize the chances of hitting what you want. So if you can, play additional cards, if you can use your Town Store before playing Pokegear, again, you want to min-max. So just like how in Miraidon, you want to maximize thinning out as many non-lightning energy cards that you can in your deck so your electric generators hit stronger. You want to be able to thin out as many non-supported cards in your deck so that your Pokegears can also hit stronger as well. There's a lot of games where you're gonna have a very thin deck and you'll be able to play Pokegear and basically guarantee you're gonna hit a supporter that you need in your deck. So, but anyways, 4 Research, very good. Drawing cards, very good. Next up, we got 3 copies of Boss's Orders. You need 3. You want to be able to attack exactly what you want when you have your Volt Cyclone attack charged up. You want to be able to swing into those Charmanders, especially the ones that have the energies on them. You want to be able to swing into just, anything. So, Boss's Orders, 3 copies. And then last but not least, the final supporter in this deck is Penny. Penny is also very, very strong because you can basically steal turns away from your opponent. You can use Penny to pick up an Iron Thorns that is potentially stranded in the active. You can pick it up and remove those damage counters from the game. For example, if you are short an energy or two, whether it's a lightning or a DTE on your benched Iron Thorns, being able to pick up an Iron Thorns that has those energies on the field and then just move those energies essentially over to your new Iron Thorns that's going to attack is also very, very strong. Penny's very good. I would recommend keeping 2 copies in. Just, you know, denying a whole turn of damage is insane. Full 60 card deck list on screen right now. If you want to copy it, you can also go to the description of this video and copy and paste it into PTCG Live. But I want to quickly talk about a couple of the matchups in this deck and how they kind of go. And also 2 cards I am considering for this list include Eerie and Misfortune Sisters. Those 2 cards are very good at deleting important trainer cards your opponent might play, and if you're able to hit particular cards like a Canceling Cologne or a rare candy, it's going to mean your opponent will have less outs to win the game. And of course, if you guys want to see gameplay of this Iron Thorns deck, subscribe to the channel because I'll have a lot more gameplay for this deck going forward. Alright, so let's talk about the top 10 or so decks right now that Iron Thorns can bump into. Starting off with the best of the best, we got Regidrago V-Star. It's basically just a race of how quickly can your opponent draw into their Canceling Cologne and have their board set up. Iron Thorns turns off all their abilities. It is an insanely ability reliant deck, so you kind of auto win if they're not able to get their Canceling Cologne off quick enough. Next deck is Charizard EX. You get the turn off Pidgeot all game, you get the turn off Rotom, you get the turn off Lumineon. Charizard's not able to accelerate those energies from the deck with Infernal Rain, so your opponent then has to manually attach to fires, which is very, very hard to do. And yeah, if you want to see a full gameplay of my cup finals against Charizard, I'll have that video on the channel later this week with full commentary. Gardevoir is another deck that you kind of also get to cook. However, Gardevoir does have built-in counterplay involved with it. They have either Klefki, Mimikyu, or Fluttermane in those decks, and those can counter Iron Thorn's ability. So if they have those counters in the active, like a Klefki or a Fluttermane, that means that their Gardevoir EX will be able to use Psychic Embrace, their ability, their energy acceleration to cook you. So you want to knock out those pesky control Pokemon that control your Iron Thorns as quick as you can. Next up, we have Golden Go EX. Golden Go EX is a deck that is also, I want to say, an auto win for Iron Thorns. They do get to play Canceling Cologne in some of their list. However, Golden Go is just so reliant on the ability coin bonus and Radiant Greninja. So you're turning off their entire draw engine. You're very favored into Golden Go. Next up is Pidgeot Control. Another matchup you're very, I want to say, favored into as well, because you're turning off their Pidgeot the entire game. And if they do eventually get their Pidgeot on the board, you can just one-shot it with Iron Thorns. So the main concern for Pidgeot Control is if they have Mimikyus available, and so you're going to want to hit those with that Velocity, knock out the Mimikyu play as quick as you can. Raging Bolt is another favored matchup for Iron Thorns EX. I beat 2 today back-to-back, and one of them just wasn't able to really play the game at all because they had no Teal Mask available, right? They can't Squawk, they can't Greninja, their abilities are offline. However, some Raging Bolt players will play Fluttermane because it is an ancient Pokemon that can also accelerate, or you can use Sada on it as well. So you have to look out for those plays and make sure that their Fluttermane doesn't get too much value. If they get Fluttermane in the active, expect them to use as many abilities they can because they're only going to have 1 turn of abilities, so it has to be a really dang good turn. Next up, we got Terapagos EX. Terapagos EX is a little bit of a scarier matchup. We do have some great cards in this deck, like the Crushing Hammers and the Enhanced Hammer to knock those important double turbo energies off the board, but Terapagos is not going to be able to evolve into their Pidgeot EX, or they could, but they're going to have to play Canceling Cologne to get full value out of Pidgeot. However, your opponent might be able to do plays like Explode double Dusknoirs and just attack with Terapagos, right? So that deck isn't too ability rulebox ability heavy. Terapagos is a sketchier matchup. You have to respect a Terapagos player, and usually a lot of Terapagos players are pretty experienced and know how to play at a high level. So you have to respect the Terapagos matchup and try your best, make no misplays. Lost Box is a sketchier matchup at times. You do, however, get to turn off Radiant Greninja. You do get to turn off Blood Moon or Soluna as well. Pikachu EX is scary because they're able to one-shot you. Miraidon EX, You are favored into Miraidon EX because you're able to turn off their Tandem unit, you're able to turn off Radiant Greninja, you're able to turn off Latias, you're able to turn off like their whole deck. However, they are able to potentially get a turn 1 donk on you if you only get 1 set up. So you do want to go second. You want to take second from Miraidon. If they have Zapdos plus Miraidon EX, they're able to swing for 230 damage, which does one-shot Iron Thorns. If they prize their Zapdos and they aren't able to get it out, then you're just basically running away with the game because you're just going to be able to use Penny and pick up your Pokemon. And again, they have no abilities, right? So Miraidon is very Roblox ability reliant. Against Miraidon, you want to make sure you're hitting that Lost City onto the board and knocking out that Zapdos as quick as you can. Dragapult EX is a very scary matchup as well because they're able to do big board wipes. They can, put 200 onto the active and then 30 onto your Thorns, 30 onto another Thorns, and then they'll do a switch or a boss play or whatever, and then bring in your weakened Thorns and do a 4-prize turn. So Dragapult EX is another scary matchup. I did again beat one at the League Cup. You do get to turn off Rotom V, and Rotom V is very important for that deck, along with Fez and Lumineon and Radiant Alakazam. So Iron Thorns does have some really strong counterplay into Dragapult, but all it takes is one really good Judge, and you have Devo in there, and you got the Hammers in there, and you got Lost Vacuums. It is a matchup that you have to tread carefully. Also, when you are playing Iron Thorns, do keep in mind to remember to try and keep the gameplay as clean as possible. If your opponent is drawing cards off Radiant Greninja or off Pheasantipity, for example, then they get a double prize penalty. So if you're not on the ball, maybe they just draw too fast and you have Thorns out, they're going to get a DPL. So I'm sure there's going to be games that you play where your opponents will forget they have no access to abilities and they're going to get a DPL for doing an illegal play. I would love if you hit that like button down below. It helps me out an absolute ton. Don't forget to use code SneakerTalk at comfyhobbies.com. I hope you guys have a chill day, chill evening. Thanks for watching. See you later.